Before I start, I'm not a professional YouTuber, so do not expect anything professional in this video. With that said, I've been wanting to build an NAS now for a while because I do have quite a bit of data I want to have a proper backup of. And well, I'm finally going to get myself around to building that NAS. Let's first start off with the case. It's an NO, I believe you pronounce it, case. This is actually a network surveillance system case thing. You're actually supposed to have like a special little controller and a bunch of security cameras hooked up to this thing. Obviously, I don't have any of that. This is just the case itself. The company that made this original case is still active to this day. Here's your website, and if you actually go to products here and you can see the network video recorders, if I scroll down, it's within this family that I currently have. These are the more recent models they have. So that means the current model I got, or at least the case I got, is a fairly early model. But since it's a fairly early model, it's still using standard components. It will fully support my ITX motherboard I got. I just had to get a CPU cooler that's thin enough that'll also keep the processor I'm going to be using under check and whatnot. Now, granted, I'm using a 65 watt AMD APU, but this little processor here will be more than enough. And considering this is going to be a NAS, this processor is really not going to be worked that hard. And when it comes to keeping everything cool main wise, I have an industrial grade Noctua fan of 120 mil, and I'm just going to jam it in the back right here. For main storage, I just got a NVMe 500 gig NVMe. I was originally going to get a 250, but the 250 and the 500s are basically the same price, so I just bought a 500. Let's see, for connectivity to the motherboard for the hard drives, I'm just using these little SATA cables. And when it comes to RAM, I'm using 32 gigs of DDR4. I'm not going to turn on XMP because for me, XMP and AMD are fairly unstable. And considering I'm building this thing, or I'm wanting this thing to be as stable as possible, I'm going to keep everything stock. I'm going to do no overclocking. With that said, what is the processor I'm using? Because, well, you can already see there's one in here right now. This is a Ryzen 5 1600. I'm not going to use this because it's just a CPU. I want to have an APU. So as I'm getting this thing set up, and of course, if I just want to monitor stuff, I won't be able to have a video image to see what's going on. And that's why I also have this LCD monitor with a homemade little bracket right here with a big rare earth magnet. That way, so I can just place the monitor literally just like this, power on the system, make sure everything's working. And if I want to check something real quick, I can just glance over at the monitor and see what it's doing. And when it comes to powering this monitor, it just takes a 12-volt power source. So I will be tapping into the flex power supply that this thing has to power it up. But with that also said, I'll probably be swapping out that flex power supply for like a 350 watt from like a Silverstone, I believe. Not Silver, some good flex power supply manufacturer. I believe the one that's already in here is maybe like a 200, maybe a 180 watts. So it's going to be at that middle ground where it might just be a little bit too low. But again, I did initially build something in this thing and it did work, but never AMD. It was an Intel system, so if it worked with the Intel system, I don't see why it wouldn't work with the AMD rig. So with that said, what is the processor I'm using? Here is the processor I will be using. I got it off eBay for 40 bucks. There is one bent pin, even though the eBay seller sent it in this little hard case. It's just due to the way these processors are put together and whatnot. So when it comes to the main NAS build, it's more or less good to go. Like I said, I'll probably need to swap out. I know I need to swap out that flex power supply. I don't know if this board could actually run on a single 4-pin or if it needs a full 6-pin to function properly. But like I said, since I'm not overclocking, it theoretically should work. And again, I am eyeing a $100, like 350 watt flex power supply for this thing because again, this thing is fairly standardized when it comes to all its components. It's just fairly compact. The power supply I'm probably going to be getting is going to be this one right here. This one will have all the plugs I need, and it's also a 350 watt, which is going to be more than adequate for what I'm going to be doing. So this will probably be about around the time when I actually get all my hard drives because, well, I mean, the power supply I got does work, but I would probably want to swap it out anyways because I would want something a little bit more newer, and this thing may actually have the plugs I probably fully need to get the board here to fully function because, like I said, I don't know if this board will actually function on just a single 4-pin or if it actually really needs a 6. But like I said, since I'm not overclocking, I don't see why it wouldn't work. So I'm going to get everything set up and I'll come back. Well, lighting's not going to be that good because like I said, I'm not a professional YouTuber, but first thing I need to do is I need to deal with that one bent pin on this processor. So let me figure out where it actually is and then go from there. Because I remember seeing it. I just gotta make sure I find it. Alright, the bent pin, or pins in this instance, are right there. It's just a few. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little flathead and I'm just going to unbend, and I'm just going to bend them back into place. I probably won't be able to record it properly because, again, I'm trying to do this myself. But luckily, all I really need to do is just put this flathead just a little bit in place. And then those bent pins, they're still bent, but not as much as they were, which means that it's going to more easily slide into the socket of my motherboard. So give me a second. Here's my motherboard. See if I remember how to handle AMD systems again. Pull that out. Put this in there. Then let's see, where is that little triangle out on these things? I forget where it is because I'm stupid and I don't mess with AMD builds that often. Okay, I found it. All right. I do a little bit of a press, but everything's pressed in. And then just put the retention clasp down and the processor is in its place. So next step for me to do is to get the cooler set up. So give me a sec. Alright, so for the cooler, I showed it off earlier, but here it is. This one's fairly low profile. And for CPU, well, thermal paste, I'm just using this stuff right here I have on hand. So give me a sec. Alright, so the instructions for this one are a little confusing. I mean, I think I understand it, but I'm going to have to do this all off camera because I got to concentrate. That's the one thing that sucks about a lot of these coolers. They're not the same when it comes to installing them, but again, I think I understand how to get it done. I need to remove the LGA bracket. I need to put the AM4 bracket, install that, and then install these little guys onto that, and then I can, again, it's a little confusing and I need to do it all off camera. So I'm going to get it done off camera and come back. Yeah, the instruction manual is not that good, especially considering when it comes to how they say the things comes in and whatnot. It says the bracket here is supposed to be pre-installed and whatnot, but it's kind of not. As in, these little guys are not installed properly. So these are the long ones. So I was about to make a big oopsie and actually use the long ones because when I put everything together, there was none of these were actually on the bracket. But when it comes to the AMD socket AM4, you actually need to go to this little baggie right here and use the short ones. So again, this instruction manual is not that well worded, but at least I figured it out, thank God, before I actually started mounting everything. It is nice that you can even use the original backplate for the AM4 bracket, but for me, I'm going to use the included one because, well, it's a little more nicer and, well, I want to use it instead. So, like I said, there's a reason why I want to put this together off camera, or at least put the cooler together off camera, because this instruction manual, at least for me, is a little too all over the place. It could also be just me being autistic and stupid and not understanding things. One of the two. Quick update again. I decided to forego this plate right here because there's no stoppers for me screwing it down too hard. With that said, if I do use the original backplate that came with the AM4 bracket, I actually have little stoppers by the bracket itself. That way so I can know how far to actually wrench the thing down without actually busting anything. With that said, you may also note that I did bust the ARGB header on my motherboard. Oh no, I'm not going to have RGB in my freaking NAS. And with that said, I'm going to wrench it down again and then hopefully have a fully working board. Alright, got the board set up, got the RAM installed, got the cooler installed, and got the storage installed. So next thing I need to do is I need to pull the flex power supply out of the case to see if this thing will actually fire up with a single 4-pin instead of the normal 8-pin these things I guess require to run. I don't see why it wouldn't work, but Again, I don't know for certain yet. Well, jank level is off the charts, but now I get to see this thing will fire up, so let's see if I can get it to do anything. Alright, so that kicked on, this kicked on, and now I just gotta wait for something to happen on the monitor, so it will take a little while because it needs to train and whatnot, but I will come back when something happens. Alright, I got an image on screen. We're good to go. Alright, BIOS recognizes the processor, and it also recognizes my RAM. So now what I need to do is I need to tell it to boot to the thumb drive, and it looks like it'll be doing that. So with that said, let's go save and exit. And it should boot up relatively quick again. It's kind of a shame I'm going to be using this monitor to, monitor my NAS, because this is a nice little monitor. But I'd rather dedicate to that task than just like a secondary on my main, because my main has an ultra wide and it's not really necessary. But it would be nice to have like a small little sub monitor for like monitoring temps and whatnot. Oh, good old Windows never cease to be whatever that is. I expect as much when it comes to Windows. It's stupid, but I'll install Windows and come back. I forgot to mention the power supply I'm using, or the one that's in the case, is actually a 190 watt. It will work, but I would obviously very much like to upgrade to at least that 350 I showed off earlier. I could probably also upgrade to like a 250 and be completely fine, but I want 350 because, like I said before, I am going to be tapping into the 12 volt power to power this monitor off the power supply for the computer or the NAS, and I want to have that little bit of extra wattage so I don't overload the power supply. I'm fairly certain I'm going to be fairly close to overloading this thing if I got it all set up with both the with all 4 hard drives and whatnot. So like I said, I'll get Windows installed and I'll come back. I want to quickly chime in on the installation method, or install, whatever you call it, for the little thermal right. When it comes to this particular manual, what needs to be said is when it comes to the little stop ops right here, there should be an extra image there saying that if it didn't come with the actual little stop offs on the bracket like it initially showed, you need to use the short pegs instead of the long pegs. Because apparently the long pegs are meant for like Intel and whatnot, and the short pegs are meant for AM4. That's like the only gripe I have, and that's why I was confused as heck. Again, luckily I spotted it before I started putting it on the board, but it's an oversight on their part. But either way, the cooler itself should be more than enough to keep that little processor cool and whatnot, even in that little NAS. Especially considering I'm using a Noctua fan and whatnot. Alright, some time has passed. Storms are currently storming right now. I played a little bit of Halo and like a few other little things, and it's nice and stable so far. Currently what I'm doing is I'm just running the new Dawn demo at 15 FPS just to see what will happen. And so far everything has been fairly stable, more or less. And when it comes to Halo, it ran all the Halos or MCC relatively fine. The only one I had issues with was Halo 2, but that's because Halo 2 is a Xbox One game. It plays 360 era games just fine. With that said, that's at 720p, and all I'm really asking for is stability. And so far, it's doing that. So, since I now have a system that I know is stable, I'm actually going to start the process of putting it inside this case here. But I'm going to wait for all my for the storms to pass before I do anything like that. So I'll come back in a little while. Alright, the storms have passed. I can now start the process of putting this thing together. Reason why I was waiting for the storms to pass, because they were severe, and if something happened, I need to be able to get to my safe place, and well, luckily that didn't happen. So, with that said, I got both side panels off. So, one thing you'll note, here's the ITX, where the ITX board will go. I already have a fan in here, but I'm going to swap it out for the Noctua because, well, I want to have a high-performance Noctua in here and also something a little more quieter than this Corsair one, or not Corsair, Cooler Master fan. So, one of the other things I do want to note about this particular case is that it was originally riveted to the actual metal casing right here, but I unriveted it, and now I'm just using nuts and bolts to hold parts together. I got nuts and bolts back here. And of course, I have 4 total right here to hold the hard drive cage. That's really all that's necessary to hold the hard drive cage. And luckily, of course, when I go to remove this and this whole area here gets all opened up, so I can easily work inside it and properly cable manage, and of course, put the motherboard in here and whatnot. And as you can also see, this is how much room I have when it comes to CPU clearance. So I know the CPU cooler I got now is going to be just maybe like a millimeter or two lower than this little guy right here, but it will work. So I'm going to fully remove these guys and get this thing back together, or start putting it together, and come back and of course watch his videos because I want something entertaining. All right, got the front panel, got the top panel, got the whatever you call this thing in the hard drive base. Got everything installed excluding the side panel, so I can show you what everything looks like. Not really much I can do about cable management on this side, but who really matters? If I flip it over to the other side, you can see here's the nice thin cables I bought, and they're actually labeled on top of that, so I was able to easily put SATA 1 to SATA 1 and so on and so forth. And just a little bit of duct tape right here to keep them out of the way. And when it comes to overall amount of cable and everything else, there's barely anything obstructing the fan, and there's nothing obstructing this. So I don't even need the little plastic grate here that I was originally planning on using. So that also goes to show how old this thing actually was, because the old SATA cables on this thing were the big old red thick ones. Those things were long, crazy long. I mean, these are like 1'6", but the other ones were like the normal proper SATA length. So there's a bunch of cable disaster inside this thing. But with that said, it's now been set up, and like I said, since I'm planning on using this thing as just a NAS, I don't need any like card right here for like any acceleration or like a video encoding or anything like that, like other YouTubers do. If I do want to do something like that, I'll actually build a separate system just for that. But for now, when it comes to my movie playbacks, it's like directly on my phone, directly on my computer, or in the most recent of cases, I'm using my VR headset, mostly my Quest 3, because it has the higher quality screen and lenses to actually watch my movies and whatnot natively on this thing without any streaming and whatnot. And it's really cool watching movies on this thing and having it being played directly on the device instead of through streaming and whatnot. So I'm getting the best quality out there. And I also have VLC sideloaded onto this thing, including with the videos and whatnot I'm gonna watch on it, and it runs completely fine. So I'm going to fully close this thing back up, and I'm going to see if it still fires up. I will eventually get the power solution for the monitor figured out, but for right now it's still being powered by the wall. More than likely what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drill a small little hole right here, that way so I can have a little plug, and that way so I can have a little power cable going to the screen, which will be somewhere on top of here. And then I'll buy like a small, short, very flexible HDMI, like flat maybe, and just have it route all the way down to here and whatnot. I'll also go and tune the back right here to keep everything nice and cool, but I'll need to do that when I actually get hard drives and whatnot installed on this thing. But for right now, I just want to see if the stupid thing still fires up. I don't see why it wouldn't, but you never know. Alright, got everything set up. Let's see what happens. That flashing light is supposed to be the hard drive indicator, but whatever. Windows 11, no. Alright, now what I'm going to be interested in is the temperatures that everything sets at. So I'm just going to run the old New Dawn demo. I think I may eventually just load up Sea of Thieves on this thing just for the giggles, just to see what will happen, because I'm fairly certain it's going to run atrociously on here, but it'll be a better way to properly stress test this thing. But for right now, I just want something nice to look at, and Sea of Thieves can be nice to look at, but this is a lot more nicer. Some time has passed, and temps are more or less at 124, 123, give or take. Now the next thing I need to do is make sure the back planes for the hard drive cage thingy actually still work. Last time I ran this thing and built something inside it, they did work, but I want to make certain again because, well, it's been a while since I actually used this thing. So I'm going to get some hard drives and come back. Apparently one of my drives has a Windows installation inside it, so Other than that, it looks like all 4 SATA ports are in full working order. And it looks like I got two 2TB drives that apparently are good to go, and one just sitting there and doing nothing. So I'm going to just muck about these drives and figure out what they have and go from there. I'm going to forego applying CSEs on this thing because I'm fairly certain it's not going to run that good at all, and this is supposed to be a NAS. With that said, it's been nice and stable throughout the times I've been using it, and I think I can just put this thing away for now and wait for those hard drives to come in. I will actually set this up somewhere so I can just leave it on and just monitor it from time to time. But generally, it looks to be a nice stable system and it fully works. I would like to have gone a 6-core processor, but a 4-core for something like this is more than enough. Eventually, like I said, I will want to swap out that power supply for something a little bit more higher wattage and something a little bit more newer, but again, I'll deal with that when I start buying the hard drives for this thing sometime next year.